So the United Nations is about to turn 80. But, instead of planning a big celebration, it's really facing a moment of truth. This is an institution that was built for the world as it was after World War II. And now it's at a serious crossroads. People are asking a tough question. Is it even relevant anymore?
And that's really the big question we're going to tackle in this explainer. In a world that's grappling with crises its founders could never have dreamed of, is the UN actually still fit for purpose?
Okay, so to really get why there are such loud calls for reform, we first have to understand the problems. We need to diagnose exactly what's pushing the entire UN system to what feels like a breaking point.
Let's start with the most urgent crisis, the money. Just look at this. The UN's budget is projected to fall by a massive 25% in just a couple years. We're talking about a drop from $66 billion down to an estimated $50 billion. And since about 80% of its funding is voluntary, this financial cliff creates a really stark choice: change or become totally ineffective.
But the problems go way deeper than just money. They go right to the very core of the UN structure. The Security Council, its most powerful part, is basically a snapshot from 1945. It's frozen in time, reflecting the world order right after World War II. This means major global players today, like India, which is one of the biggest contributors to peacekeeping, are just left on the outside looking in.
And this isn't just some abstract political science problem. It has huge real-world consequences. This outdated structure leads to paralysis. We see it all the time with the veto power, which creates deadlocks in huge conflicts, from Ukraine to the Middle East. And all that inaction, that feeling of unfairness, has just chipped away at the world's trust in the UN's authority.
Now, on top of all that, get a load of this number. The UN is trying to manage over 40,000 mandates. 40,000! Just think about that. It's like an impossibly long to-do list that member countries have been adding to for decades. It's an absolute recipe for overload, creating duplicate work and stretching the organization's resources incredibly thin.
And that overload, it causes a ton of internal chaos. You've got what's called rampant fragmentation, where different agencies like UN Women and the UN Population Fund end up doing overlapping work, which is just, it's inefficient. A lot of their systems are outdated, still relying on slow, manual processes. There's this constant mismatch between their ambitions and their resources, way more tasks than they have money for. And all this is happening while brand new challenges like AI ethics and cybersecurity are popping up, things the UN just isn't built to handle.
So, with that whole diagnosis of dysfunction pretty clear, what's the cure? Well, let's move on to the prescription. A huge, coordinated reform plan called the UN80 Initiative.
So, what is this thing exactly? Well, the UN80 Initiative is a direct answer to all those problems we just laid out. It's this ambitious, system-wide push that's being launched to coincide with the UN's 80th birthday. The goal sounds simple, but it's massive in reality. Make the entire UN system more nimble, more efficient, and, at the end of the day, a lot more impactful.
And listen, they're not messing around here. This isn't some 10-year plan that'll get lost in bureaucracy. There's a very focused, fast-paced timeline. The initiative kicked off in March 2025, and the main action plan is set to run from November of that year through December 2026. That is a really tight window, which tells you there's a serious sense of urgency.
So, how are they going to tackle this beast? Well, the strategy is broken down into three pretty logical parts. First, find efficiencies. The low-hanging fruit, the smarter ways to work. Second, go through that entire list of over 40,000 mandates and figure out what's still relevant and what can be combined. And third, the really big one, start examining major structural changes across the whole UN system. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What does this treatment plan actually propose to do? Let's look inside the action plan.
Okay, so the plan is broken down into these work packages. For peace and security, the aim is to create new, more efficient models for their operations. For humanitarian response, it's about simplifying emergency plans. And remember that fragmentation problem we talked about? The plan tackles that head-on by looking at mergers for entities with overlapping missions, like the UN Development Program and the Office for Project Services. And finally, to fix those old clunky systems, a package called Operational Enablers will build shared data platforms and unified supply chains.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second. We've gone through the problems and the plan, but why does any of this really matter? What's the prognosis if this actually succeeds?
It really all boils down to this one simple, powerful idea: to create a UN that is more agile, more efficient, and ultimately more impactful. It's about transforming the organization from this slow-moving bureaucracy into a dynamic force that can actually keep pace with our modern world.
And if they can pull this off, the potential impact is just enormous. It would mean a UN that can respond much more effectively to new crises. It would mean modernizing global governance for the challenges of our time. And it would mean getting better at delivering on massive goals, like the Sustainable Development Goals, which, let's face it, affect billions of lives all over the planet.
And that leaves us with this final, absolutely critical question. The plan is ambitious, and the need is crystal clear. But can an organization that was designed for the 20th century truly overhaul itself to meet the unprecedented challenges of the 21st? Well, the next few years are going to give us the answer.